It's hard to measure up a show as hit or miss as Young Justice Invasion is. Ask a group of fans what they think about it, and you'll get a lot of different answers. Some saying it holds up just as well as Season 1 does, and others saying that it was the catalyst for the show's downfall. Now, I don't come down at either of these extremes. My opinions on Season 2 are, as a whole, very mixed. But that doesn't mean I feel lukewarm about the show either. There are aspects of Young Justice Invasion that I find to be brilliant. And there are other aspects that I think are as disappointing and underdeveloped as the show's later seasons. But I'll spoil this video right away by acknowledging that I do believe this show's positives strongly outweigh its negatives. Season 2 still retains the heart and focus of the original season, and its returning cast of characters are written masterfully. And I do really want to talk about all the things that I love about these 20 episodes. But before I get into that, I first have to deal with what went wrong with this season. And what better place to start with this critique than with this season's most controversial decision, the 5-year time jump. I understand why so many people were disappointed with this move. The Grotto in Mount Justice is as much a memorial for this universe's lost heroes as it is for the lost storylines we viewers never got to see. With how attached fans got to this rendition of the DC universe, it's frustrating to have so many iconic stories and origins sidelined by the time skip. But all that said, I actually don't think the problem here is in the time jump itself, but in its execution. I'm saying that because the first season did almost the exact same thing that Season 2 does, but successfully. Season 1 also starts in media res. It also skips over the origin stories for Robin, Kid Flash, Speedy, and Aqualad. The difference, though, is that their origins still remain relevant to the story. As the season went on, we got to hear their backstories retold, and were able to understand how they've been shaped by them. That slow and intentional approach to character building was one of my favorite parts of Season 1, and it is sorely missing from Season 2. We get no details on the origins for Wonder Girl, Bumblebee, Mal Duncan, or Lagoon Boy. The Bat Family is done particular disservice. It genuinely boggles the mind that the writers relegated one of the most famous comic book stories of all time to a single hologram in the grotto. I didn't need to see Jason Todd's death or Tim Drake's origins, but even hearing snippets about them would have helped. The time skip could have been an exciting way to introduce the viewer to this new cast of heroes. But with how half-heartedly they're all introduced, it ends up detracting from the show. And it represents a more foundational problem with this season. None of these new characters are properly fleshed out. Again, in theory, I really like the idea of opening up the team to newer sidekicks and letting the stars from Season 1 take on mentorship roles. It's a good way for this universe to mature. But again, the show fumbles on executing with this idea. The writers did do a good job of characterizing the new batch of heroes. I find most of them very likable and innately interesting. But that only makes it more frustrating when almost none of them are given any development throughout the entire season. Again, the problem really isn't that we didn't get Batgirl's origin story. The problem is that we don't get any Batgirl stories. Her, Robin, Beast Boy, and Wonder Girl are largely on the team just to provide fisticuffs. Characters like Mal, Bumblebee, and Lagoon Boy are given slightly more attention, but it's still an incredibly limited amount. I understand the desire to make the team feel larger and more complicated than before, but there had to be a better way to do that than to introduce a whole host of fan-favorite characters and then do nothing with them. Contrast this to Season 1, where every single character had at least one dedicated episode really focused on detailing their ideals, personalities, and flaws. Even some Justice Leaguers were given thorough character arcs. That stuff is so much rarer in Season 2. And when this season does try to set aside an episode to develop a new character, it still can't hold up to Season 1. An episode comparison will illustrate what I'm getting at. Season 1's Homefront and Season 2's Beneath both feature a new and insecure sidekick try and prove that they're worthy to be on the team. In Homefront's case, that character is Artemis. She feels insecure because of her ruthlessly selfish and egotistical upbringing. Her father and sister have taught her to instinctually put self-preservation above anything resembling heroism. She's both ashamed of these instincts and feels that they should disqualify her from truly being a part of the team. In Beneath's case, the character is Casey. She feels insecure because her teammates won't let her join in on a stealth mission. No, that's it. I'm really not trying to be pejorative here. That is really the only thematic through line present in this episode. It's already more shallow than Artemis's story, but the structure of Homefront's plot is also much stronger. In Homefront, every scene relates back to Artemis's struggle. We get flashbacks showing what her childhood looked like, a slow build-up to the conflict that allows the audience to see how she normally interacts with her teammates, and once the conflict with the Reds does start, her anxiety and lack of self-confidence are put front and center. Her struggles aren't just relegated to a few quiet moments in between the action. They ground and contextualize the action. Contrast all this to Beneath. In that episode, Casey's feelings of inadequateness are first expressed a quarter of the way through the episode. We then get one scene of her trying and succeeding to do stealth, one scene of her trying and failing to do stealth, and then one scene where she feels down at herself for failing, before getting pep talk into trusting herself more. Finally, we get an action scene where she trusts herself and saves the day with the help of her teammates. All these moments I've mentioned take up maybe 4 minutes of this 22-minute episode. The rest of that time is relegated to overly long exposition, build-up for future episodes, and fight scenes that are well choreographed, but narratively hollow. I want to like this character. Her acting and personality suggest that there is depth to her, but the writers don't let that depth come first. The only new characters who get a thorough season-spanning arc are Blue Beetle and Impulse. And I really do like their arcs, but they feel so isolated and singular next to all these shallow characters. The first season had a real sense of community with how much each member of the team related to one another. None of these characters' arcs existed in isolation. They developed and trained alongside one another. In Invasion, it's two fleshed out and well-realized characters standing next to a bunch of action figures. Again, I want to like these characters. I want to grow as attached to them as I did for the original cast. Their acting, personalities, and designs do the foundational work to make that happen. But unfortunately, the writers were unwilling to build past that foundation. Alright, I hope I've conveyed why so many people don't like this season. Now, let me explain why so many others love it. Invasion may have failed to make its audience care about its new characters, but I think it did a fantastic job in building up its returning cast. This is where the time skip is most justified. It is jarring at first to see how much these characters have changed, but the writers were at least careful here to clue us in on what happened with them over the last 5 years. There's a newfound sense of muddy and messy realism with all of the original team members. The original season had plenty of dark moments to it, but all that darkness was still somewhat romanticized. It would obviously be traumatic to be raised in a family of heartless assassins and crime bosses who want to turn you into their successor, but there's also something kinda cool about that too. But there is nothing cool about going through a breakup after 4 years, or having a lifelong friendship rupture, or in grieving the loss of a friend. The common motif for all the older team members' arcs is disillusionment. All of them are finding their simple childhood ideals tested, and are somewhat backsliding into old ways of thinking that they were supposed to have conquered at the end of Season 1. Dick had resolved not to be as coldly calculative as Batman was. But while he isn't willing to sacrifice lives for the sake of the mission, there's not much else he isn't willing to sacrifice. McGann had learned to trust herself and to use her Martian powers for good, but then finds new reasons to mistrust her own abilities in Season 2. Artemis resolved to be honest and open with her teammates, and then spends half of this season assuming a fake identity and fighting them. The only character who didn't have to compromise on his ideals from Season 1 is Wally West. And we see how that ends for him. Young Justice Invasion is darker than Season 1, not because it's got blood and guns in it, but because it challenges the simple optimism that was central to the first season. Now, this darker tone is never suffocating, and that's thanks to the younger heroes. They may be lacking in depth, but their simple, heroic idealism continually harkens back to the optimism these older characters used to have. This contrast, though, only serves to emphasize and heighten the darker tone when it flares up. There's a constant theme in this season of the impossible choices one has to make in life. That, of course, manifests in the moral dilemmas Calder is put in as a double agent, but every one of the older characters wrestles with some impossible dilemma. McGann doesn't trust herself anymore to use her psychic powers, but the team's success depends on her doing so. Connor would like to get back together with McGann, but doesn't see how reconciliation could be possible. Wally wants to retire and live a quiet life, but his partner couldn't feel more different in that regard. Dick wants to protect his team, but protecting all of them means putting some in pretty serious danger. Young Justice Invasion is excellent at building these complex moral and psychological puzzles that seem unresolvable. And the external conflict between the Light and the team is also a lot more complex. The show never veers into moral relativism. We know the entire time that the Justice League and the team are the good guys, and that the Light and the Reach are evil. But it does get us to question the methods and efficacy of each side's tactics. Is Nightwing and Calder's double agent plan worth it, considering all the sacrifices it cost them? Are the Justice League right to hide the Watchtower from the world? Is Star Labs right to treat these teenagers as they're doing? The show doesn't offer easy answers to these questions, but it does want the viewer to understand why Wally and Connor are furious at Dick. Why the public trust is turning away from the Justice League, and why these kids decide to run away. All of this makes Season 2 feel far more cynical than its predecessor. One of the first dramatic moments in Season 2 involves Superman pleading with a group of Croatians to allow him to save them from an explosive. But they don't understand or trust him. In Season 1, he would have found a way to save him. There was always another way in that season. But that just isn't the case in Young Justice Season 2. And yet, be that as it may, the external conflict between the Reach and the team still trends towards the good guys winning. Still, there are plenty of setbacks and half-defeats the team suffers that can all be traced back to the backsliding of the older members. But Season 2 still retains enough grace to allow these characters to learn from their mistakes, rather than being destroyed by them. There is no singular lesson or maxim they learn that magically reverts them back to their old optimistic selves. But all of them do, at some point, acknowledge the ways they've fallen short of their ideals, and make a general resolution to be better in the future. These quiet and introspective scenes spent with these characters are some of my favorite in the entire series. They're not nearly as sentimental or drastic as the character growth moments from Season 1, but they stick with you more for that very reason.
And we both need to get over ourselves. Save the team, then save Blue. As a certain 13-year-old was once fond of saying, that's just what we do.
And then comes episode 19. We get a showdown between the Light and the team that is every bit as exciting, bombastic, and heroic as the one in Season 1's finale. The idealism of the younger characters begins to look like it will win out. Despite all the mistakes and sacrifices and compromises the older team members made, it's looking like they will be rewarded for their efforts in the end. That idealism only gets stronger for most of the next episode. Things are looking up. Until they aren't.
Just tell them, okay? Kid!
Wally's death is the perfect tragedy for this season. And so many years later, it still hits like a bullet watching it happen. He's the one character who really didn't make any serious mistakes. The one character who really deserved a happy ending. And he's the only one who doesn't get it. This death is deservedly the only part of episode 20 that is remembered well by fans. But to truly understand it, I think we need to look a bit ahead, closer to the episode and a season's conclusion.
Since when are Tim and Cassie a couple?
Since Wally, was kind of a life is short thing. It gave Cassie the courage to kiss him.
Well, that kind of courage
Can be hard to come by.
This scene is so much more humble and quiet than anything we saw in season 1's finale. But I'd count it as even more poignant. Even after everything that happened, after seeing their friend die, after doing horrible things themselves, after having every reason to believe they're not worthy of each other, these two are still willing to lean on the youthful optimism that first started their relationship. And they lean on it not even despite of, but because of all the cynicism around them. Life is short, right? Young Justice Invasion is cynical, but it isn't hopelessly cynical. The idealism that the first season was built on does need to bend in the face of all this messy realism. But it doesn't need to break. It's more subtle and complex than it was before, but it's not less present. I find this idea especially poignant right now when I'm just a year older than most of these characters. It's a good reminder that life does get darker, but that's no reason at all to reject the sentiments and ideals that made it feel brighter. With how messy and multi-layered most of season 2 is, its closing minutes can be summed up in one sentence. The more things change, the more they stay the same.